right, folks. Welcome to Nino's Corner.tv. I'm going to be joined with Jon Pounders and Timothy Alberino. Now, this is going to be one hell of a podcast because Timothy Alberino is an author, lecturer, and explorer whose work bridges the gap between history, mythology, and biblical scholarship. His best-selling book, Birthright, if Alex can put that up there, Birthright, 2020, has garnered widespread acclaim, offering a revolutionary perspective on the biblical narrative that resonates in an age of artificial intelligence, transhumanism, and increasing disclosure of the alien presence. Now, we all want to know what these things are. This alien agenda that everyone keeps talking about, the 3-eye atlas, everything that's transpiring right about now. Now, I always thought it's going to be the government playing that alien card. But no one's going to know better. No one's researched the way that Timothy Alberino has and can explain it to my audience. He's been to the sites. He's been to the ruins. He's researched his head off. He knows what he's talking about. I'm going to bring them both on right now. Jon Pounders from Pounders Quest and Timothy Alberino. Man, thank you guys for joining me.
Thanks for having me, gentlemen. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, Tim, I'll just kick it off, and Jon, you just interject whenever you want, man. I'm very happy that you're co-hosting with me, man. I love having podcasts with you, bro. They've always been great. It's been a while since I've done with you, Tim. I've reached out to you a couple times. Finally, we nailed this one down. But it goes to to a verse in the Bible. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of the world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. I hope that in this podcast you help me and my audience understand what we're up against here, what is really going on this planet, because there's so much to be uncovered. Tim, thank you. Like I said, first off, your next visit, your next exploration is going to be in Peru, correct?
I've got several projects in Peru right now that I want to get underway. And one of them is pretty dangerous. So there's a situation, I guess I'll get into it. There's a situation unfolding in Peru right now in which I've talked about at length on various podcasts on my own YouTube channel, in documentaries. I've talked about the 𝗪𝗪𝗃𝗃, specifically the 𝗪𝗪𝗃𝗃 Grande, it's called, is an artificial tunnel, a man-made tunnel that runs from beneath 𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃, which was the epicenter of the Inca Empire, their primary temple. 𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃 means a place of gold. It was loaded with gold and silver. All of the most important artifacts of the Inca cult, the Inca religion, were stored there. The mummies of the former kings were stored there, the mummified remains of the former emperors. And they had a garden at 𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃 that featured life-size humans and animals and plants and different other items that were cast in pure gold and pure silver. So this place was loaded with treasure, and they had constructed a tunnel beneath this temple, and the tunnel ran for precisely 1 mile to beneath the galleries, or rather to the galleries beneath the megalithic citadel of 𝗧𝗪𝗯𝗃, which is in the city of Cusco. It's kind of outside of the city of Cusco, up on the mountain. And this tunnel was constructed to run, again, from the epicenter of the Inca Empire, 𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃, 1 mile to beneath the galleries of 𝗧𝗪𝗯𝗃. Those galleries are mostly naturally occurring. You're talking about magma chambers. You're talking about natural caverns, probably some artificial construction, maybe extensive artificial construction under there as well. The tunnel itself is a artificial tunnel, as I keep saying, but it's lined with the same andesite blocks as the Inca temple above, 𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃. Now, the reason why this is so important is because after Francisco Pizarro killed the Sapa Inca, the Inca emperor Atahualpa, he and his men marched on Cusco. And while they were en route to Cusco, the Inca nobility and the Inca priests took all of the most important artifacts, all of the most precious artifacts, religious and otherwise, and and had them taken down, sequestered down into the tunnel, and ultimately deposited beneath 𝗧𝗵𝗶𝗹 in those galleries. And so there's a hoard of gold and silver under there, but more importantly, there are artifacts under there that I think will reveal who the true builders, the identity of the true builders of that megalithic complex and of the megaliths in general in Peru. There are likely both Inca and pre-Inca artifacts of great import, very significant artifacts in those galleries, in those caverns. So my colleague 𝗬𝗵𝗶𝗹, I won't go into the whole story, but my colleague 𝗬𝗵𝗶𝗹, who's a Spanish explorer, he's an older gentleman, I think he's 80 now. I've done a lot of work with Anselm in Peru, and Anselm, long story short, did excavations at 𝗀𝗂𝗃𝗁𝗃 and at 𝗧𝗵𝗶𝗹. He saw with his own eyes the tunnel. And by the way, I should have said from the beginning that this tunnel, it's a legend. If you talk to the historians and archaeologists in Peru or anywhere, this is just a legend, right? Nobody believed, past tense, it was true. But Anselm saw the tunnel with his own eyes, and I won't go into that story. But later on, some years later, many years later, I was in Peru with Anselm. We were on another project, on an expedition, and we had some state-of-the-art ground-penetrating radar units with us. We put them into a duffel bag, and we walked the perimeter of the 𝗀𝗃𝗁𝗃, and lo and behold, we detected the tunnel. We found it. You can clearly see the tunnel, and it's lined with stone, and it's there. It's precisely where Anselm said it would be. Well, Anselm last summer, I believe it was last summer, he did a presentation, and he held a press conference in Barcelona, and he did a presentation on some of the new findings regarding the 𝗀𝗃𝗁𝗃, and specifically he unveiled the images, the GPR images that he had captured with the same technology that we had used previously. And it clearly delineates the legendary 𝗪𝗂𝗁𝗃. Okay, the tunnel's there, and it's not even that deep beneath. It runs under the road. And so Anselm, unbeknownst to me, had initiated a project to get into the tunnel, and he had all of the documentation signed by the authorities, by the archaeological authorities in Cusco. He had the information, the GPR data regarding the GPR data rather, that indicated where they needed to dig, and he had all of the cooperation of the archaeological community, all of the people who were requisite for this project to go through, except for one signature, and that was the signature of the director of the Ministry of the regional director of the Ministry of Culture. And the reason why he didn't have that signature is because that position was in flux. It had been vacated, and it hadn't been filled yet. Meanwhile, while Anselm has his project hanging out there, there's a archaeologist in Cusco. His name is Jorge Calleros, and his wife. They hijacked Anselm's data. They initiated their own 𝗪𝗂𝗁𝗃 program. They basically
hijacked. Are they trying to steal the credit or infiltrate?
They took the data. They're using Anselm's data, and they're trying to get into the 𝗪𝗂𝗁𝗃. And these guys are communists. I mean, literally, not figuratively. And so this has been obviously very frustrating for Anselm and for myself and for our team, because not only did they do that, but then in concert with this, with this basically intellectual theft, they put out a hit piece against Anselm in the media in Peru, basically saying that he's it's kind of like a DEI thing. They're saying that he's this white Spaniard who's coming to steal their heritage, right, that he's a treasure hunter, that he's like the old conquistadors who just want to find gold and silver and take it out of Peru, and it's complete and utter nonsense, lies.
Character assassination, discredit him, the whole thing.
Yeah, and then they were saying he used illegal technology, and they referred it to the intelligence community in Peru. And then there was I believe it was a general who mentioned in an interview, this is something that the intelligence community is going to look at, and they're talking about throwing Anselm in jail. So they preempted his project, and then I'm part of that project with Anselm, and then they put out a hit piece to make sure if Anselm comes to the country, he gets thrown in prison, or at least prosecuted. And meanwhile, you have all of these influencers, all of these social media influencers making this pilgrimage to 𝗧𝗵𝗶𝗹 and to take photos with 𝗀𝗃𝗂𝗁𝗃 and raising money for this guy, Graham Hancock.
What,
they're down there raising money, yes, with 𝗀𝗃𝗂𝗁𝗃 and praising him, and they have no idea of what's actually happened. And so it's been very frustrating for us, and it's an ongoing, unfolding situation. I talked about this on the Sean Ryan show, and it's since heated up. And so that's a situation that I want to attend to. And then there's some other things going on in the jungle. There's I think we've identified an area up in the Andean Amazon where there is a lost city, a significant lost city that we want to try and go after. So there's a couple of different projects in Peru. Peru's always, of course, you have these, the tridactyl desiccated bodies, the so-called alien mummies in Peru that have garnered
the elongated. Are they the ones with the elongated skulls?
They've garnered a tremendous amount of attention on social media. And again, this is like a pilgrimage. Everyone going to Peru now, going down to see the tridactyl mummies and all of that. So I've been down there. I was invited to go down there by one of the professors at the University of 𝗬𝗂𝗏, and to examine the mummies. And I did. And I find them, the large ones, I'm interested in the large ones, not very interested in the small ones. And because there's large ones, and then there's like 2 foot long ones, and the larger ones are basically the size of the native people today, but they're in the fetal position. I'm sure everyone has seen photos and videos of these. They've been around for like 7 years, and they're very compelling. They're very, very interesting. So there's a lot happening in Peru. Plus, they're going to have an election here in April. The government's going to change over. And it's been kind of hostile territory for a while, politically speaking, because the last president was a communist, basically, Castillo. So anyway, that's some of what's happening in Peru.
Do these mummies that have you guys gone taking DNA from them? Do they have human DNA? Are they?
There have been every test under the sun has been conducted on these mummies by various people, various groups, international groups, American, Japanese, European, Peruvian, have journeyed to Peru and have run a battery of testing on these things, CT scans and X-rays and DNA analysis and all kinds of stuff. And the DNA analysis, they sent the samples off to various labs around the world. And I think the results, in my estimation, are probably being misinterpreted right now. And that's a long story. But I'm convinced that some of the results are remarkable, but some of them I think are being blown out of proportion. There's a lot of hyperbole. If those mummies are real, it changes human history, period. Because what they would represent is a hybrid species, an intermediary rather, between Homo sapiens and something else, right? They have some very interesting features. The elongated skull, most of them have elongated skulls. They have very, very large orbital sockets, so very large eyes, very small noses, no ears. A few of them are pregnant. In fact, the one we're looking at here is likely pregnant. She's holding her womb.
Now, how tall are these creatures? I'm going to call them a creature. I mean, are these
5.5 feet roughly? They're not exceptionally tall. They're a normal stature for the indigenous people of Peru. And you'll see the most striking feature is the tridactyl fingers and toes, 3 fingers and 3 toes on each hand and foot. And as I said, there's a couple of other very interesting oddities. See the puckered lips on this one. Each one of them is different, by the way. Each one of them has anatomical anomalies that differ. And as I said, I interviewed Professor 𝗬𝗎𝗂𝗁. He's the primary caretaker of some of these mummies in Peru. Now, 𝗬𝗵𝗶𝗀𝗍, the Mexican journalist and ufologist, he's purchased several of these things. And so he owns some of the mummies in Peru. And I was with Jaime in Mexico looking at the 𝗂𝗶𝗱 back in June of this year. So there's a lot of weird stuff circulating. I'm a very incredulous person. I think that when you see artifacts like this, when you see, you know, Aztec, so-called Aztec or Mayan artifacts coming from Central and South America, or mummies or whatever, I think the first inclination should be to doubt it, because there's so many hoaxes. Now, if this is a hoax, and I don't know if it is or not, if this is a hoax, these mummies, then this is the greatest, this is the most complex hoax ever perpetrated on archaeology in history. I mean, these things are, if this is taxidermy, then these are the best taxidermists on the face of planet Earth.
Well, let me ask you this, Timothy. You know, do you feel in your heart of hearts, what do you think these creatures are? Do you think they're aliens? Do you think they're indigenous to this planet? Do you believe they are the Nephilim, the giants that the Bible talks about? Or is it just such a wide net, such a wide umbrella? It's so gray that there's no real place. You can't really place any of these creatures. You know what I'm saying? Are you
talking about these specific ones? These pterodactyl beings?
Let's just talk about these for now. Yeah, these specific ones.
I'm not sure if they're, if were they ever biologically alive? Were they living and breathing at some point in the distant past? I mean, these things are, you know, they go back to the time of the Nazca civilization, and possibly the 𝗏𝗏 civilization. And, you know, so they're like 1,500 years old, or 1,000 years old, at least some of them. And so were they alive 1,000 years ago? You know, the answer is I have no idea. I'm not willing to dismiss the possibility. That's how compelling the large ones are. The small ones, not very compelling to me. Their anatomy is too rigid, and those are the ones that 𝗬𝗵𝗶𝗀𝗍 unveiled to a meeting with Mexican congressmen. I believe it was last year, a couple of years ago. I'm not that interested in the small ones, but the large ones are when you look at them up close, you can't deny the feeling that these things, they seem very organic. They seem to have lived and died, but I don't know. I have no idea. And it could just be because they're composites of human beings, various. And we know one thing for sure. There's a couple of things we can say for sure about these mummies. They are organic. There is nothing inorganic that has ever been detected in these mummies. There's no glue. There's no epoxy. There's no wood or metal or anything like that. There's no plastic. They're not paper mache. I mean, they're 100% organic. So, and they're not really mummies. As I said in the beginning, they're desiccated corpses. They're dry corpses.
Do you believe they could still be on this planet? Do you think they could be?
That's a good question. If these turn out to be real, and again, I'm not saying they are, but if they turn out to be real in the sense they could be just artifacts, ancient artifacts. That's a possibility. Very slim possibility, but at least for the larger ones, because the taxidermy is way too advanced here. But if these things turn out to have been alive, then yes, it's possible they're still around. Now, I'll tell you something interesting. When I was in Peru back in 2019, I was down there on another expedition, and we had our ground penetrating radar, and our radar is aerial. It operates off of a drone platform, so we can fly our GPR. By the way, that unit, we had a deep penetrating radar and a shallow penetrating radar. The deep penetrating radar could penetrate 300 feet below the surface of the Earth. Wow. And the shallow radar was higher resolution, and we could see 15 feet below the surface in optimal conditions. So I we took this GPR unit and we flew it around the 𝗀𝗄𝗯𝗀𝗃 pyramid because I had suspected, for whatever reason, it's just a gut feeling. I suspected that there was a tunnel beneath the 𝗀𝗄𝗯𝗃𝗃 pyramid. It's an adobe pyramid out in the desert of 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁, which is just north of 𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗃. And it's a large adobe pyramid, and large in the sense the blocks, the adobe blocks were large, but it's in a state of ruination. And we flew our drone over it, and sure enough, not only did we detect one tunnel, we detected two massive tunnels intersecting below the pyramid, 100 feet below that pyramid, artificial, and apparently artificial. They were so large you could drive a semi-truck through them.
Jeez.
And what's interesting is this 𝗀𝗄𝗯𝗃𝗃 pyramid is located in what's called the 𝗀𝗂𝗯𝗃𝗃 necropolis. And you can walk around 𝗀𝗂𝗃 today, just walk around the site and find the remains of the 𝗃𝗃𝗃 people, especially 𝗃𝗃𝗃 nobility, elongated skulls, red hair, and in the burial bundles, right? A lot of burial fabric lying around. And so this was like the epicenter, believed to be, if not the primary metropolis of the 𝗃𝗃𝗃 civilization, one of the primary cities, one of their primary settlements. Well, what's significant here is that there's a lot of misinformation out there about where those mummies were found. There's disinformation that the location of where, and I'm referring to those tridactyl mummies. There's been intentional disinformation in regard to where they were discovered. They were not discovered in the caves where out in 𝗵𝗶𝗋, where it's alleged that they were discovered. They were not discovered there. According to my sources, they were discovered underground, in an underground network of tunnels. Exactly what I found with my GPR in the desert. So, so that rings true to me. And if that's true, it makes the story even more interesting and enticing for many reasons. So it's a big mystery. It's a big question mark over this whole thing. I'm not willing to say definitively that they're real, and I'm not willing to say that they're hoaxes. I think everybody, we should all be operating under the suspicion that they're hoaxes. That's right there. I think that is the most sensible, rational starting point when approaching these kind of artifacts. And again, any kind of artifacts that display UFO iconography on them from South or Central America, I think the starting point should be suspicion, incredulity.
So Tim, with this ground penetrating radar, they did that. They mapped the Giza pyramids and they found the same thing, megalithic structures under the pyramid, correct? Why aren't they out there with excavating machines right now, digging these things up? What's stopping people? Are the government's protecting this? Are these? Is it higher than the government's? What do you think's going on? Why can't we explore these regions?
In the case in Egypt, it was actually satellite data. They used I believe it was a sonar. I can't remember exactly. I think it was a sonar technology that satellite based in Egypt on the Giza plateau. You can't dig, you can't move, 3 feet of sand on the Giza plateau without the express permission of the government and of the archaeological cartel in Giza, in Egypt. That's not necessarily the case in Peru. It is the case in Cusco, Peru. In Cusco, Peru, Machu Picchu, that area, same thing. You can't do anything, and it's very, very difficult to get a permit, obviously, because they want to protect the site from damage, but they're not interested in new narratives. They've got it figured out. They're not interested. They know what the pyramids are in their minds. They already hold the knowledge, and they don't want us to. No, they don't. I know enough about these archaeological cartels to know that that's not the case. It's not that they have all the information. It's that they're invested in maintaining the status quo. Their prestige, their jobs depend on it, their pensions depend on it, and so it's as simple as that. Most archaeologists in the field in these countries, maybe not in the United States, but certainly in Peru and Egypt, they're only interested in maintaining the status quo.
I want to interject something real quick.
Go ahead.
Just to see if this is connected. I know recently, when I say recently, it's been within the last year, you were connected to a lot of the stories about this because you've been to Peru and you actually went and visited with some of the tribes. There was the 7-foot tall entities of some sort or whatever they were that were almost like they were from Tron, the future, and these people that you interviewed were saying that they saw these. Do you think this is connected, or are they trying to run people out of certain areas, or is it even connected at all?
I suspect that incident was humans, most likely, or maybe, dare I say, some kind of co-op between humans and the non-human faction. But it seemed very human to me. But these individuals were in possession of advanced aerospace technology, and it seems almost like the activity of an aerospace contractor or someone who is subcontracting for an aerospace contractor. That's often the way it happens. Aerospace contractors will subcontract out the dirty work, and sometimes they lose control of those kinds of situations. You know, those they certainly subcontract out the wet works. So that scenario was it had the fingerprints of human activity, albeit with advanced technology, and it resonates with the individual. I'm drawing a blank on his name right now, who was in Indonesia, and he and his team of Marines came across that large saucer craft, and they later on, well, they concluded that it was some kind of human trafficking operation using advanced technology. Michael Herrera, and it's in that category in my mind. The face peeler situation is in that category. There's apparently a group of very, very nefarious individuals who are in possession of advanced technology, doing the worst things imaginable with it, right? Human trafficking and organ harvesting and who knows what else, probably hybridization of some kind. And there seems to be a lot of information coming forward right now, both publicly and behind the scenes, that is beginning to, as I said, that is beginning to shed light on this very disturbing situation. And these groups would be, not necessarily connected to any government. You're talking about paramilitary or groups who are private contractors working for aerospace companies. Maybe in some cases, private contractors working for elements of, dare I say, who knows? I mean, we're speculating here, but somebody, and I'm saying some human faction, apart from the aliens, because those are real, but some human faction is playing very dastardly games with advanced aerospace technology and other kinds of advanced technology.
Why Peru, do you think?
Why Peru? That's a very good question. I think Peru is the most enigmatic place on planet Earth. Maybe I'm biased. I lived there for 10 years. But there's so much, there's so many mysteries in Peru, so many things yet to be discovered, things that are being discovered almost weekly, even in terms of new animal species in the Amazon there, but archaeologically speaking as well. There's, if you were to ask, if you go into the jungle if you go into the Amazon and you start talking to people about aliens and UFOs, so many of these people have had encounters with UFOs. And in many cases, aggressive, very negative, hostile encounters. And many of them suspect that the villagers, the indigenous people, but also just the people living in Iquitos and Nauta and some of the larger urban areas, they suspect that there's some kind of a base out there, like an alien base out in the Amazon. And I think they might be right. But if you go up into the Andes, and by the way, I should, before I move to the Andes, in the jungle in the Amazon, it seems to be a lot of activity related to what we call gray aliens, or at least that's assumed. Indigenous people have seen things that are reminiscent of gray aliens, but then you go up into the Andes, and you kind of get a different story. Tons of UFO activity, but this seems to be the domain of what are called, or what are described as, the 𝗦𝗏𝗔 in ufology. The tall, blonde or golden blonde, fair-skinned, clear-eyed 𝗦𝗏𝗔s. And the Andean people refer to these beings as the 𝗬𝗏𝗂𝗁𝗃. That's how they refer to them, the 𝗬𝗏𝗂𝗁𝗃. So up in the Andes, they see the 𝗬𝗏𝗂𝗁𝗃. They've had encounters with the 𝗬𝗏𝗂𝗁𝗃. So they see the same kind of craft, saucer-shaped craft, and other configurations. But most of the encounters are benign. Some of them even perhaps benevolent. In the Amazon, it's kind of like it's a different story. For whatever reason, in the Amazon, most of the encounters that I've heard are not benign. They're hostile or frightening. Well, a lot of them would be benign, just lights in the sky or craft hovering above the canopy. But the ones in which there's actual interaction with the people, in many cases, they seem to be hostile. So are there two different factions? Is there one faction living beneath the Andes, inside of the mountains? Because that's what they say. They say the 𝗬𝗏𝗂𝗁𝗃s live in the mountains. And then the other faction, perhaps an installation of the Greys in the Amazon, subterranean. And are those two factions maybe not friendly with each other? Who knows? I mean, again, we speculate, but there's definitely a differentiation in the kinds of UFO encounters that people have in the Amazon as opposed to the Andes.
Are these tunnels under the megalithic structures confined to just those areas, or do you think there's an elaborate tunneling system connecting them all on the planet? Do you think it's like a honeycomb connecting all megalithic structures, or we have just not gotten that far yet?
It could be like a honeycomb situation. Yeah, you're talking kind of like an inner Earth,
right,
type theory.
Everything connected.
A hollow Earth type theory. I think there may be something to that. I do. Of course, I don't have any proof. I think we've created a network of deep underground military bases since the late 1940s. But there may be a vast network of both naturally occurring and artificially devised tunnels and caverns and galleries that are interconnected all across the planet.
The reason I asked that, Tim, is because there are stories of the Grand Canyon, right, of having Egyptian relics, right, and then there's people that have gone into certain areas of the Grand Canyon to be met with Black Hawk helicopters and things of that nature. What's your thoughts on that?
I've never seen any evidence that there's anything in the Grand Canyon other than anecdotal evidence that some of these areas are cordoned off, inaccessible to the public. Of course, you have stories like the story that came out in the early 20th century about the Kincaid expedition, where this Professor Kincaid went and found a cave and explored the cave and discovered Egyptian artifacts. The story reads like fiction. It may not be fiction, I don't know, but it reads like fiction to me. But it would, let's put it this way, it wouldn't surprise me if there were Egyptian or Phoenician artifacts, not only in the Grand Canyon, but in other parts of the United States, of continental United States as well.
Reason I ask this is because I'm wondering, could these entities, these beings, these aliens be coexisting with us simultaneously on this planet and have been for millions of years, controlling and manipulating humanity?
Well, yes, I mean, they could be. There's no question in my mind that they are right now co-inhabiting the planet with us. Now, if you come from if you approach this from a biblical perspective, then the answer is yes. I mean, you know,
That's
we
why I
talk
read
about
that verse in the beginning.
When you talk about the quote unquote fallen angels, the devil and his angels, as they're described in the scriptures, are confined to the earth, or at least this is where they spend a lot of their time, and so they're here. You know, what does that mean? What does it mean? Are they in some other dimensional realm? Are they in like a different, like, spiritual world, or are they just physically, literally here? Are they under the Andes? Are they under the Amazon? Do they have some kind of a base? And then you set that aside and you think about gray aliens. Gray aliens definitely have a presence and have had a presence here for at least 100 years, probably longer, at least back to the late 1800s, the end of the 19th century. And they definitely have bases under the ocean.
Yeah,
I think they have mobile bases actually on the ocean floor, but they have bases under the ocean and bases under the surface of the earth in various environments.
I guess what I'm asking is, do you think they could be coming from under our feet instead of above? I mean, or could it be a mix of both? But I mean, do you
Well,
think?
what do you mean? So, okay, well, here's in my mind, the most likely scenario. Okay, so you have to parse this, okay, because there's different groups. If you are talking about, again, the quote unquote fallen angels, then they were here before us.
Right. That's it.
So they're not necessarily indigenous to the earth because they're not from here. They're extraterrestrial. They're not from the earth. Their provenance is not planet Earth. They are therefore extraterrestrial by definition. We are earthborn. We're from here. We were born on planet Earth. So we're indigenous. But that doesn't mean that we're the oldest.
Or that we weren't
haven't been
genetically
around
modified, right?
Well, they were here before us, according to the biblical narrative. And that's a fact. I mean, I would say that's a biblical fact. So, but they're not from here. Okay. I think the same can be said of the Greys. Now, I'm not convinced that the gray aliens have been around for that long. They might have had some kind of a presence, maybe a minimal presence in ancient times, but certainly they've increased their numbers significantly in the late 1800s, mid to late 1800s. And so they came from somewhere else, but now they've established bases here. So the answer is yes and yes. Are they here? Yes. Do they have bases here? Yes. Are they? But they're also not from here. They're not indigenous to planet Earth. I don't believe they are. I believe they've come from somewhere else in the universe. By the way, I don't think we're talking about another dimension here. I think we're talking about somewhere in the universe. Are there creatures that are indigenous to planet Earth that are of non-human intelligence? There very well may be. Some people wonder if Bigfoot isn't an indigenous.
I was just going to go there.
You know, an indigenous hominid that is older than the human species. Other people think that that creature was brought here, that it's extraterrestrial. You know, I don't know, but certainly
able to change dimensions, correct? He's interdimensional, and isn't that what a lot of people are saying about?
Well, a lot of people say that, but that doesn't really mean anything, you know, because the problem is nobody ever defines what they mean by interdimensional. I'm not adverse to the idea of interdimensionality. I subscribe to the hyperspatial theory of the universe, which posits that there are more than 3 physical dimensions and one of time, that there's at least another dimension we're talking about directional dimension, not another realm. Okay, so this gets very complex. When most people invoke interdimensionality, what they're conceptualizing are the Marvel movies. You know, they're conceptualizing Doctor Strange, you know, taking his ring and making that portal, and then going into sometimes another part of the world, but in many cases going to another universe, going to another realm entirely, a universe that is not our universe, an alternate universe. And in the Marvel movies, it's just a big cluster F. You know, it's just they just mix a bunch of disparate theories that utilize the idea of extra dimensions, and they just jumble them. They put them in a blender, right? But it's important to understand that there's various theories that are they're distinct from one another. You have the hyperspatial theory of the universe, which again posits that there are more physical directional dimensions than the three that we're aware of, and the one of time. And then you have the parallel universe theory, which this is where you get multiverse, which posits that there are literally other universes, not just our universes. There are other universes, and that those universes operate with other different laws of physics than ours, and differ in ours in very important ways. And then you have the alternate realities theory. So let's put it in terms that people can, I think, understand better. So the parallel universe, that's like the Marvel, that's like the MCU stuff, right? That's the multiverse. It's all that. That's parallel universe. The alternate reality is like Stranger Things. So the alternate reality is like a different reality that's adjacent to our own. It's the upside down world.
Right.
Both of those things are constructs of the way that the Marvel universe uses the multiverse theory and the upside down in Stranger Things are wholly fictional. They use elements from the various theories. They incorporate some of these scientific ideas, but they're fiction. And so, you know, if we're going to talk about interdimensional beings, then here's the question. What do we mean by interdimensional? Where are these beings coming from? Okay, so let's say, and I'll ask you guys this question. Let's say we're sitting together smoking cigars in my backyard, and we look up in the sky and there's a portal that opens up, and 3 flying saucers come through the portal, and then the portal closes. Where'd they come from?
Another dimension or another place in space where they just, you know, collapsed space and time and came through that portal. I mean,
those are the two options, right?
Or they just materialize and dematerialize. I mean, that's, you know, I've seen them in White Sands here. I saw a constellation of UFOs that appeared, and then when I took my phone out, they were gone, and then they appeared somewhere else. I was blown away by.
Well, it wouldn't necessarily indicate that they dematerialized. It would mean that they moved faster,
right,
than your perception. So, what you said, well, they either come from a different dimension or from assumedly somewhere else in the universe, right? Okay, well, those are two separate ideas.
Correct.
If you have a being that is interdimensional, you have to slot it into one of these theories that we have. It either belongs in the hyperspatial theory, or it can fit into the multiverse construct, you know, the parallel universe, or an alternate reality. Now, if you're within the hyperspatial theory of the universe, an interdimensional being doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. It's just, are we saying that these are beings like us that can make use of extra dimensions that we can't access because we're not technologically proficient enough? Well, then what you're dealing with isn't an interdimensional being. You're dealing with a corporeal being that has the capability to travel, to make use of, to avail itself of extra spatial dimensions. This sounds really complicated, but it's very easy. This is Star Wars. Okay, so Star Wars is, you just got a bunch of people in the universe, right? None of them are interdimensional, but they can do what? They can jump in their craft and take advantage of hyperspace. They can jump into these hyperspace lanes and use them to take shortcuts across the universe. So you have physical, regular beings, human and otherwise, who use not through the agency of technology, they're able to access these hyperspatial highways and quickly move around the universe, right? Those are regular beings making use of extra dimensions. They're not interdimensional biologically or ontologically. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I have one more possibility after you get done that I want to throw out there as well.
Okay, yeah. Well, to close the loop here, so if you have in the multiverse theory, let's say, you have beings that are truly interdimensional who don't belong, who aren't native to our dimensional world. They're coming from a universe that has other laws of physics. They're coming from a universe that is completely different than ours, right? And okay, that would be an interdimensional being because they're crossing over from one dimension into another, right? They're coming down from, maybe they exist in a higher dimensional plane and they're coming down into a lower dimensional plane. Okay. The problem is if that were true, we would never, these beings would not look like us. They would not have biology like us. Their anatomy would be so we wouldn't even be able to understand it. It'd be like a hypercube. It'd be like trying to bring a hypercube, a tesseract, right, from the fourth dimension into the third dimension and try and make sense of it. We can't. So if you have beings who kind of look like us, who are biological, anatomically very similar, flying around in craft that crash, that is functional, that we can at least understand to some extent how it works, have a limited success in reverse engineering it, at least incorporate components of it into our own hybridized vehicles. You know, according to the late Colonel Corso, we were able to develop fiber optics from crash retrievals, night vision, some of these other technologies. So if it's true, and I would submit to you it's 100% true, that we have recovered crashed aerospace vehicles of non-human design and their non-human biological pilots, and that they look like we've been told that they look like, in other words, the Greys, and not just the Greys, but they're anatomically not all that different from us, although they are different, and their technology is, yes, very, very advanced, but we can at least understand some of it. Then we're not talking about an inherently interdimensional being here, because these beings clearly operate under the same laws of physics. They have the same kind of material bodies. They use the same kind of technology as we do. They didn't come from a different universe. They came from our universe. That's what that would indicate, right? So if you look at what I would describe as the evidence, then what we see are beings who originate in our universe, but who are in possession of exceedingly advanced technology. And remember that Arthur C. Clarke said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
So do you believe that, and I'll let you jump in a second, John, but do you think that sometimes, or that we could be limiting them to beings, that these could be just consciousness, and that's how they get here, is through consciousness? They're not even beings. Could they be light consciousness? Could they take a form of some kind of, I mean, if you really think out of the box here, could that be a possibility that, you know, consciousness travels faster than light, and consciousness can go through any dimension it wants to? And is that a possibility, that maybe that they're not even, some of these entities aren't not even biological beings? Does that make sense?
There's a lot of possibilities. There's a lot of thought experiments that have been injected into the ether of the internet, right? Into social media. There's a lot of newfangled ideas. There's a lot of old ideas being rehashed. And, you know, we have an abundance of ideas. But the only ones that make a difference to me, the only ones that are relevant to me, are the ones that conform to what I would call the data set. The data set of what I think we can say with a great deal of confidence in regard to UFOs and the beings that pilot them. And at the center of this data set are crash retrievals, biologicals that have been recovered with them, and the information that we've been able to derive through the abduction program from abductees. That constitutes the primary body of data that the public has, and to some extent, that the public has available to them. Again, to some extent, not entirely, obviously, but enough, I think, to derive some rather concrete ideas. Now, if you take the data set and you then extrapolate a theory based on the data set, you formulate rather a hypothesis based on the data set, then you're not talking about some phenomenon of consciousness here, or at least not some disembodied consciousness. You're not dealing with interdimensional beings. You're not dealing with spiritual beings. You're dealing with very biological beings who make things, who build technology, who have their own agendas, who interact with us, who interact with each other, who are not infallible, who make mistakes, and who are very, very advanced in their understanding of the laws of physics and their application in terms of technology. And that's what the data set indicates. Now, you can extrapolate from that whatever, are these artificial intelligence and whatever, is there, are these beings just like meat suits for disembodied consciousness that's somewhere else in the universe? I've heard everything. And yeah, these are all very entertaining ideas. But again, to me, and I'm an investigative researcher. So for me, the fantasies are fantasies. I need to distill everything down to what we can call data and a body of facts, let's call them facts, that we can agree on, at least in I think rationally come to a conclusion. And by the way, there are some of us, and I don't say this to boast, I just say it because I know I project a lot of confidence when I talk about aliens. There are some of us who have seen things that the rest of us have not. So some of my confidence comes from that. And that's why I can say concretely.
That's why I have you on here.
Well, that's why I can say concretely that at least a large aspect of the phenomena is physical, is within our universe, perhaps taking advantage of extra dimensions in a hyperspatial universe, but nevertheless our universe, not interdimensional in the sense that they are ontologically from another dimension. But you could use the word interdimensional. Really isn't the best word here, because when people say interdimensional, they're making an ontological statement about the being itself. The being by nature is interdimensional. And I'm saying no, the beings are not, based on the data set, interdimensional, but they're using perhaps facets of extra dimensions to do things, right? There's a differentiation there, very important.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, so like another thought I had too about this, because I do believe that a lot of it's physical, because there are situations to where physical things happen that people have tried to rebuke in the name of Jesus, and there's nothing that happens because whatever they're dealing with may be a government, a technological group, or whatever. I don't know if you're familiar with Nathaniel Gillis, either of you guys, and a lot of his new research where he's talking about these beings, whatever they may be, which, unclean spirits, whatever they're called throughout time, they always have a different name, and the Bible gives them a name based on what they were being called at the time, but that they were able to change perception of what you might see versus what I might see, which is why when people look at the Mary apparition, some people see a woman there, and then some people see a craft, and some people see different things. And I wonder sometimes if of course there are the physical things of that, but also the perceptual, being able to change your perception, or to be able to use elemental things that have been created to materialize into a form that we're familiar with.
That's a really good point. So there's no question that these entities, perhaps even Sasquatch, can hijack our perception. That's one of the things that they can do, and that's one of the most, I'd say, alarming capabilities that they have. They can hijack human perception, and what I mean is exactly what you just said. Two people can be standing next to each other, and have two completely different experiences at the same time. And it's not, in my mind, at least I hypothesize, it's not because it's not because the being or the phenomenon is conforming to, is changing, is metamorphosizing in different ways. It's because it's affecting your perception in different ways. And, you know, this happens all the time. Human beings, you know, we have paranoid schizophrenics who walk among us, who are very tormented individuals because they are seeing and hearing things that the rest of us are not. And it's not that what they're seeing and hearing, it's not that they're seeing and hearing, you know, behind the veil or something like that. It's that their perception is creating a different reality for them than for us, or at least there are aspects of their reality that are different from ours. There are things happening in their perceptual universe, in their brain, that are not happening in ours. This is a perceptual phenomenon, and it's due to something going on in the brain. I don't claim to be an expert in paranoid schizophrenia, but clearly there's something going on with the brain. I mean, you can begin to have very interesting perceptual phenomena happen if you're dehydrated enough. Just get dehydrated enough. You don't want to do this because you get into big trouble and very possibly die. But if you get close enough to death, your brain begins to do very strange things. You start to hallucinate. There are a plethora of psychedelic substances that can make you hallucinate. And so you can be sitting, all three of us can be sitting together in the same room, and you two guys are on, one of you is doing ayahuasca, the other's doing peyote, and I'm just sitting here doing neither. And you two are both in your own little worlds, your own little perceptual realities. And I'm not seeing any of that, right? So human perception has to be factored in, has to be. And these beings can hijack our perception. I believe, and this is just rank speculation, I just hypothesizing here, that the Sasquatch creature is telepathic, and that strongly, very powerfully, potently telepathic creatures have the ability to hijack human perception, yeah, at least momentarily. Certainly the Greys do, but let's say that Sasquatch does, for the sake of argument. Let's say that Sasquatch is a highly potently telepathic creature, and it has the ability to hijack temporarily our perception, to put thoughts into our mind and images, right? Because let's say that the brain works like this internet connection that we have right now, right? Let's say the brain works, let's make it a little bit more definitive. Let's say that our brain waves work like Wi-Fi. Well, what can you transmit over Wi-Fi? You can use that Wi-Fi signal to transmit audio, can't you? But you can also use it to transmit visual information. Both. It's both. It's audio and visual. Well, what if a brainwave can do the same thing? What if the brainwave can transmit audio and visual? And if that's the case, and you have a potently telepathic creature, then maybe they can transmit audio and video, or audio and visual. And so if that's true, then I'm going to give you a real incident, and I'm going to give you some details of a real incident here. You can walk outside your front door, look up, and be in the presence of an 8-foot-tall Bigfoot staring you down, right? And communicating telepathically with you. You hear its voice in your head, and then it turns around, takes a few steps, and vanishes into thin air. And so what we do naturally, because really the only way we know how to make sense of that, is to ascribe to Bigfoot supernatural powers, preternatural, paranormal. It's probably the best word. Well, Bigfoot's paranormal. Why? Because he freaking just disappeared. That's why. Well, hold on a minute. Did he disappear? Or did he make you think he disappeared? Did he cover his tracks to go back into the woods and make you think he disappeared, or whatever, or turned into an otter, or whatever? That's a real incident. So we are we have no idea how powerful our consciousness is. I mean, we don't understand how powerful our brains are and human consciousness. You know, you can call it the human soul or whatever. What demonstrates the power of human consciousness are near-death experiences. Think about it. I know personally probably 6 people who've had near-death experiences, and every one of their stories is different. None of the near-death, well, some of them are similar, but there's no one kind of near-death experience. It's like not everybody has the same experience. There's a very colorful variety of experiences that people have, right, when they die and are brought back. So clinically dead. Some people have like a disembodied sort of white light kind of experience, and that's it. Other people have like really, really, really detailed things that go on, where they go places and they talk to people and they see things, and there's imagery, symbolic, and they some people go to heaven, some people go to hell, some people go to wherever. I mean, they go to their grandmother's house. You know what I mean? So what am I saying? I'm saying that I believe that these experiences are being generated. You're still tethered to your consciousness. Your body is still tethered to your consciousness. Obviously, if you bring it back to life, you weren't entirely, totally, 100% gone. That tether was still there. You pull it back in, so to speak, right? And so our brains do crazy things under the influence of substances, at nighttime when we dream, when we daydream, when we have brain disorders, when we're dehydrated. I mean, and there's another, a dozen other reasons. So what I'm demonstrating is this propensity that we have as Homo sapiens to have individual perceptual experiences that are unique to ourselves that other people are not having. And if you have again, very potent telepathic creature that can tap into that can transmit information, obviously we're very easy to manipulate perceptually. I think that's a huge piece of this puzzle. And I think it explains a lot of, at least some of the paradoxical elements of the encounters that people have with various things. Doesn't explain everything. I'm not trying to say it explains everything, but it's in the equation for sure. And in fact, I was formulating this idea some years ago, and I had the opportunity to talk to Eric Bard. Eric is the chief investigator at Skinwalker Ranch. He's on the TV show. He's one of the main characters. And I was talking to Eric, and I was asking him about the experiences that people were having at Skinwalker Ranch, and why some of these experiences seem so bizarre, and why people seem to have different kinds of experiences. And he proceeded to tell me his theory. What was his theory? He believes there's something in that area. Something is able to hijack human perception. That we're encountering something that can take control of our computer screen, our cerebral computer screens, right, in our brains, that can hijack that signal and put different kinds of imagery,
whatever it was on the interface, basically, is what you're saying. Just completely hijack it.
Yes, that's right. So temporarily. So that was what he thought, and I was delighted. I said, "You are the first person that I've ever encountered that's thinking in these terms," because I was thinking in these terms, and that was very affirming to me, because Eric is a supremely intelligent individual. So I don't want to keep talking here, but John, I think that is 100% in play, at least for some facet of these phenomena.
Wow.
Well, listen, guys, I got to get to the hospital. I got to cut it here. My dad's in there right now fighting for his life. Timothy, I really appreciate you coming on. And one last question before we go. Do you think this disclosure, the way that it's going to come, is it going to come organic, or is it going to come through the government coming out and telling everyone, "Oh, this is what it is. This is who they are. This is fact"? How do you see this playing out?
Well, let me try to answer this very, very, very quickly. There is a lot happening behind the scenes. The battle right now is there's whistleblowers that are coming behind the scenes. And I know this to be true. I'm in contact with congressmen and different individuals behind the scenes. They're getting whistleblowers coming. And these whistleblowers are telling very remarkable stories, but they don't want to go public because there's no protection. There's no protection. They'll lose their jobs or pensions. They'll endanger their families and potentially lose their lives. So the effort that's behind the scenes, the effort that's happening right now, is to try and create some kind of a almost like a witness protection program, but not exactly. Some kind of a apparatus that can protect these people, their jobs, their pensions, their families, and their own lives, and an avenue, because Congress won't pass it, man. Congressman Burchett drafted excellent whistleblower protection legislation. It didn't pass. I think he submitted it a couple of times. It didn't pass, and that's the problem. So there's a lot of people lining up behind the scenes from the different various aspects of this thing, from the aerospace companies, from different aspects, right? People from military, different agencies, and they're there, but they can't come forward until there's protection. And so there are some very interesting strategies happening behind the scenes to try and facilitate this. That's where the battle is. That's where the battle is. And so the public says, "Oh, nothing's happening and nothing's ever going to happen." No, that if they can achieve this, if they can accomplish some kind of a protection in office, something that can receive these people, that can vet them, and that they can offer them some kind of protection, then we're going to see the doors are going to get blown off of this thing. Because you're talking about people who've been on the crash retrievals, you're talking about people who've seen the bodies, you're talking about people who've been in the know, various aspects of the federal government or the aerospace contractors, firsthand stuff. So that's where we are.
Beautiful. Timothy, man, I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you for your time. John, thanks for co-hosting with me. Guys, I appreciate it. Alex, if you want to show Birthright book again, Timothy's book, excellent. Where do they get this, Timothy?
You get on Amazon, and I have a book of Enoch out as well. Some other publications in the works.
Appreciate it, fellas. Thank you so much for joining me. God bless you.
Thank you, gentlemen. It was a pleasure.